All right. Good evening. All right, we're continuing our Bible study looking at the character of Jacob. So if you would like to go ahead and open up your Bible, we're going to start doing some review around chapter 30, the end of chapter 30, and covering what we did last week. So if you want to go ahead and open up to chapter 30. I think this is one of the most interesting characters, and because of the way that it reflects a lot of challenges that we have in our own personality, and the aspects of his character that we can learn about ourselves, and some of the challenges that we have, and the way that God is interacting and trying to accomplish what he wants and what he's going to do, and how we at times are still living our lives a little blind to the power that God has and what God's able to do for us. And so as we look at Jacob, we understand his birth came with controversy from being inside the womb with his brother Esau. Esau and him had this contentious relationship. They were opposites. One was Jacob being kind of the houseboy and Esau being a man of the field. We had favoritism going on between the parents, and the way that they were treated came to a conflict, and Isaac favoring Esau, loved his personality, his style, his hunting, his food, and then towards his older age determines that it's time to give my blessing to Esau, which we know that from the beginning Rebekah was told by God that it would be Jacob that would get this blessing. So the deception, all the way from stealing the birthright of food to then stealing the blessing, Jacob has to leave. He flees back. He's been commanded to go back to his uncle Laban and to obtain himself a wife, just like Isaac had obtained his wife from back at Padran. And so he's going to go back and be sent there. And on his journey there's a lot of probably emotion going on and concern and worry about what's going to happen. He doesn't know these people. Remember, he's not a young man. He's not in his 30s. We're talking about, Jacob being around 75 years of age, which to us today is extremely old, and we wouldn't imagine that a man of this age would have these type of characteristics, but he does. And so I think a warning to myself is that regardless of my age, I can be just as immature and not understanding what God is doing and trying to perform using me, and I got to be careful about my desires and needs and perceptions of what I think God wants versus what God needs to accomplish through me. And once he arrives back, we find right away, the meeting at the well, that Jacob just falls in love. Now, what type of love was that? Was this the love, agape love? Was this a love that it was just because he cared about that person, that woman so much that he cared for her? Or was it the flush kind of, passion, like excitement type of love? And I believe it was that type of love. It was more of an eros type of love where he's just excited and she was pretty. And then we find her sister, Leah, was not so attractive, basically. But he falls in love. And I want to bring up something that's interesting, that he used that to blind him, his attraction to her physical attraction and such, I think, to blind him towards Leah, against Leah. That Leah, when we looked at last week, some of the names that she gave alone to her children reflected very strongly her desire to be loved by Jacob. And so we went through that. So we've seen the children. Now, this battle goes back and forth, doesn't it? A competition between the two wives, between Rachel and Leah. Leah, God saw that she was hated, she was unloved, and so God opened her womb and she started producing and bearing children. And in the bearing of the children, she then reaches a point where she stops, and then Rachel, she's angry. She says something pretty hastily to Jacob, like, "What's the matter with you? Why aren't you giving me children?" And it's just a different personalities between Rachel and Leah. Leah's very appreciative to what God is doing and allowing her to bear children, and she's using that opportunity to try to draw the love from her husband. Rachel has his love, and now she sees it as a tool to use it to spite her sister. So this conflict we're getting, I kind of describe it as being at 30,000 feet looking down at this family dynamic that's going on. So all we're getting in this recording really is the children being born, a little bit of the back and forth. But I think that if you were living there day to day and you were having to watch what's going on between the sisters, it was very, very tense and very strifeful and angry at times. We know later on with Reuben, we see that come up, an issue there. So it just this is not a good family situation. It's not the way God had intended it. God, had not intended it, but he had also is allowing our nature to be expressed, and so that we see the dynamic of it. This is not an endorsement of concubines. It's not an endorsement by God to show that polygamy was fine. If anything, I think it shows the opposite. Each of these handmaids are also brought in and played against each other, and I think that's something you see. Hello, Eileen and Terrell, glad you're joining us. And by the way, if you are online with us the first time or you've been joining us, I hope that you would pop in some comments so that we could engage in the conversation. And I'll try not to get too caught up and forget about you and be able to respond to those comments. So glad that Terrell and Eileen are with us this evening. So just the names alone, we see an expression of Leah and an expression of Rachel's character. So if we just look at the children, just kind of put these up as a summary of kind of like Leah's children that bore forth for Jacob, even though Zilpah wasn't a direct wife. And some call him a concubine, and there's no real indication of, I guess, in a way, technically you could say she was serving in that role. Jacob's not putting a stop to it. That's another problem I have with it. Instead of saying, no, wait a minute, you're my wife, but these women here, no. And if God is willing us to have children, then it needs to be through these proper relationships. But he doesn't seem to be putting a stop to any of this. But Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah, Gad and Asher. We're going to see there's some names right off the top you can kind of see, especially one of the most renowned, two of them, Reuben, and we see Judah are going to play key roles later on with Joseph. And also Judah is going to end up receiving the seed line, meaning that the promised seed of Christ's genealogy is going to come through Judah, even though he's not the firstborn again. And you would think it would be Reuben, and in a lot of ways, historically, if you were just reading this story all the way through and you looked at Joseph, you'd say, well, Joseph would have been the one. I think you see Satan trying to attack the seed line, trying to predict it in these different young men that are coming up. So Rachel ends up having Joseph. He's the only biological one that she bears at this time. And through Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. So if I pop back and forth, look at the children that have been blessed with Leah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The number of children. Then Rachel, we see, that Rachel, she has 1 and then 2 by her handmaid. So it's time to go home. And we see that we found we had 7 years initially that he served in order to try to win the marriage of Rachel, and he's tricked. Leah is the one that's brought in. He ends up marrying her. Laban goes, whoa, wait a minute, tricks him and says, but that's not the way we do it here. Our custom is we always secure the first daughter, the oldest daughter, to marriage, then the second. So if you'll just go ahead and finish this wedding week, then you can have Rachel, and then you'll pay me the other 7 years. So 14 years have gone by, and it seems that as soon as Rachel has born Joseph, that all of a sudden it's time to go home. So let's go ahead and read 25 through 27, chapter 30, 25 through 27. As soon as Rachel had born Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go. For you know that the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed you because of me. So right after Joseph is born, then Jacob determines it's time for me to return back home. You know, that's something that he needed to do. It's already been 14 years, and so it's time for him to return back home. And he approaches Laban and says, you know, let me have my family and let me go. But Laban is not done. He doesn't want to let go, does he? He wants to hold on to this moneymaker. I mean, that's one of the things that we see, that he wants him to stick around. He also understands that since Jacob has shown up, that Laban has prospered, and that if he's going to let his number one employee go, the potential of continuing that prosperity is going to dwindle away. So he goes, you know, let's work a deal, basically, is what he's going to say. So he says, let me do this. So Laban, basically, starting in 28, says, name your wages, and I'll give it to you. And Jacob said to him, you yourselves know that I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you have had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now, when shall I provide for my own household? So he actually reminds him of the fact that when I arrived here, you weren't doing as well as you are now. Since I've been with you, you've seen how you have become very fruitful. And so I want to understand that it's God. You notice he is identifying God, that God blessed you. No matter what I did, I was prospering, and I was doing this in service to you. So Laban says, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So the deal seems strange to us who do not have any idea on how to breed or work with livestock and such. You know, he says, all I'm asking is let me go through. I'm going to separate out the sheep that are speckled and spotted and the black lambs. I'm going to then take the goats that are speckled and spotted. And this is going to be a great way to actually prove his honesty, because in verse 33 he says, so my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. And it's a guarantee of honesty, isn't it? I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to manipulate the observable condition of the sheep and the goats. Now, Laban loves it. In 34, he says, Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the male goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black. And he put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. So both of these guys are manipulators. They're both deceivers. They both believe that they're getting a good deal. They probably both walked away from that meeting going, oh, wow, this is a good deal here, because one, Laban understands that it's a very rare thing to have the speckled and the spotted. And so everything that Jacob is basically saying is, give me the rarest of the group. That's what I will take. And so as he's working and year and come and go, as the breeding season and cycle and the lambing, as they're being produced, the few that should be produced, those few would be Jacob's, and the rest would be Laban's. So Laban's looking at this going, man, this is a great deal for me. But Jacob has a lot of knowledge. He obviously, in setting this deal up, is aware of the breeding cycle and processes and how it goes about. So he knows how to manipulate this already. But Laban doesn't seem to be aware of that. Now remember, Laban wasn't very prosperous to begin with. He's probably not the one that's been out there day in and day out shepherding and breeding and lambing all the animals. But Jacob's been out there for 14 years. He's been observing, watching, seeing how all of this process of natural seasons go. So he has an idea of what to do. Now this part here, when he does this, I get so confused. It's kind of hard. I'm not a geneticist or anything like that, but it's kind of difficult to think of this. So we're just going to read it, and then we'll kind of talk about what he does. But what did Laban do? He immediately separates the spotted, the speckled, the rare ones, and he takes them and he puts them with his sons in charge of them 3 days away. So now that means that there's no way that Jacob could focus and just care for them and feed those that are supposed to be his and neglect the ones that were to be Laban's. So what's going to happen is during this process, year after year, as the birthing of the lambs and the goats and everything, that they would be separated, and then those that are speckled and spotted, the ones that were defective in a sense, they would go and be taken over to Laban's sons. And that's very fair too, because then he can't focus on just his and let them prosper and give them more food, more water, and neglect Laban's. So he has a set of flock that's Laban's. He's taking care of Laban's, and as the years are going by and as they're birthing, any time that they were speckled and spotted, then he would separate them out and they would be sent away. 3 days. So there's no way that they're able to come together. So technically, he's always having the pure of the goats and the lambs. And you would think, well, eventually, if that is rare for them to be speckled or spotted, that eventually it would dwindle down. And genetically and just through probability, eventually, Jacob's flock would grow smaller and Laban's would grow larger. But Jacob does something else. So Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plant trees. He peeled the white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And when they came to drink, and the flocks bred in front of those sticks, so that the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. But he put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flocks were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. And thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, females and male servants, camels and donkeys. That last verse there means that he's not only prospering with his agreement with the animals, the goats and the lambs, but he's also increasing in servants as well as other animals, livestock, camels and donkeys. And at that time as well, what we find is the process is weakening Laban. I looked at a lot of different things when we look at the process that he used. There's been some modern geneticists who say this is just silliness. To sit and to put these sticks, these almond sticks, they're different. If you look at different translations, they're different type of plants or whatever, but this whole process almost seems like magic or some form of superstition. We have superstitions that even, that transcended generations in families, and some even to this day. You do certain things, you could get a girl, you could get a boy. Even I know when I was working at a horse farm, there were some old ranchers and people raised breeding horses that had little tricks that they would always want, because they wanted, when I worked at the breeding farm for race horses, there was owners that would bring their mares from all around the country, and they were breeding them to these very high pedigreed horse studs, and they were wanting, a mare, and then sometimes, because they could then produce that gene or that pedigree through the mare. If they got a stud, that they could, but a stud could become very out of control, and they couldn't run them at the track and earn money. And if they cut them and tried to make money at the track, then if they were successful, then they couldn't breed them. So you either let them, you didn't cut them and allow them to remain as a stud and risk at the track that they would be successful. But if they were uncontrolled, then you had to cut them in order to keep making money at the track. One we had, the owner decided that's it. He was not going to run him at the track. He didn't want to have him cut, so he kept him so that he was never going to run at the track, but just because of his pedigree, that he was going to be able to make money just in breeding. So there was some vets that we had locally that would work at the farm and come out there and examine the horses and stuff. And I heard a lot of different stories. It was interesting in different ways. And the owners would bring their mares there, and it was just interesting, because I thought about this even that far back, was how there are some things that are superstitious, and then there's science. The vets would come and they knew precisely with their medicine how to do things. Then you'd hear the owners and other cowboys kind of saying, well, if you just do this, and it was just superstitious kind of a way. But they seemed to believe it, and sometimes I had to kind of believe they knew what they're talking about. Why? Because they'd been around horses forever. They knew how to breed horses. We can look at the Native Americans, the Comanches. They were amazing breeders. They knew exactly how to breed horses and everything. So I don't know about the precise things in which he's doing, how effective they were, what they were. One, he's called the Bible genetics or something. He's a Christian, but he's a geneticist, and he was talking about this, and he said there's some it's too difficult to narrow it down to one probable thing. Genetics being manipulated by environment, or the fact that Jacob was able to observe and know the habits and recreate those into which the behavior would change, and that what he was doing was causing that kind of behavioral change. Then some other man I heard said, well, it was some form of sedation that would get in the water, and on and on. I don't know that it's that important that we fully understand. I think the key here we find is that Jacob was successful. Jacob knew what he's doing, whatever it was. We also are going to learn a little bit more that this just wasn't something that he whipped up, some scheme out of nowhere. And we'll learn that as the story is revealed, as he then talks to his family about when it's time to go. So he grows strong. Laban is growing weak. And it becomes very well known when we look at the way that Laban's family starts to respond. Now, one thing that I found was this idea of Laban's sons. Now, there's no mention of Laban having any sons, only the daughters, whenever Jacob first arrives. So some scholars have believed that there were no sons at that time, which would kind of change the dynamic in the inheritance scheme of things. If a man did not have a male to become the inheritor, what would happen is he could adopt someone, and then they would become the firstborn. But then if he had children later, then those other sons had more sons after that original adopted one, then it would also have to enforce that 2/3, 1/3. It'd have to be divided up. So if you had these young men that where his stepbrothers come along, and then they start to see the animosity that's building, and they see what's going on. There's also have a very strong interest in protecting their financial future. It's not just that, it's also going to impact their future wealth. So we find in chapter 31, verse 1 through 3, their response to what they're seeing. And this is what Jacob is learning. Now remember, that 3 days apart. So, and over time, this isn't happening over 6 months or just 1 year. This is multiple years. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that our fathers, and from what was our father's, he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So, regardless of if we think that this is somehow a scheme, something backhanded, we know that God is involved in this. God has told him from the dream at Bethel that night, the Jacob's ladder, when we saw the angels descending, the fact that he was going to be prosperous, that he was going to be with him. We see from Laban's own comments that from the time that Jacob has been with him, he has continually prospered because of Jacob. So, and in this situation where he's trying to extract his family out and return back home, we see the same type of thing where God is continuing to prosper him and help him. So whether we look at this as somehow taking advantage, I think that this is God's providence and intervention in helping fulfill his promise to Jacob. But they're very upset because they see the wealth of the father going away. I mean, you think about it, every time it was the separating of the speckled and the spotted and separating them apart, the sons would just see that one getting larger and larger and larger, and then looking at their fathers getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so Jacob senses and he hears it. And it's not only the brothers, but also Laban is starting to become very embittered. He thought that he was a trickster, that he had tricked Jacob, that he was going to end up being, I think, poor and bound to him and force Jacob to have to stay with him even longer. But it hasn't happened the way. The two deceivers are in conflict with one another as well. So Jacob turns to his family. And so Jacob sent and he called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was. And he said to them, see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. So he holds a family meeting. He brings Rachel and Leah and expresses to them that, you know, we're having a falling out here and your father is not happy with me. But he brings up God again. You notice he says, but God, my father, has been with me. There's a comparison here between the possible spiritual condition of Laban not being prosperous, but the God of his father being so. Now, I think in the house of Laban, when we talk about the religious environment, the culture, we tend to lean towards, and I do, that Laban was a good man. He did identify and respect the Yahweh God, the God of Abraham as such. But there's also always, within all families, there's a little bit of paganism here in the culture. And that's something we will see that as well, that there's still, he's not as pure as we may think. One, in his dealings with Jacob, but also the fact that he does have some worship towards idols. But he reminds them, I have given my best to your father. And yet, he says in verse 7, your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Now, that's not something that we read about as the story progressed, as the breeding process and the cycles, and as the flocks are being separated and everything, any conversations. But apparently, Jacob is saying that every time he keeps changing it. Laban is continually trying to manipulate the agreement to where he would be the one that would be prosperous. So he cheated me 10 times. But God, he says, did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God, that's a repeat. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes, and I saw in a dream the goats that had mated with the flocks that were striped, spotted, and molted. And the angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, or molted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel. You are anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise and go out of this land and return to the land of your kindred. So God is involved, and he is aware of what's going on. And on top of that, we see that God has spoke to him and revealed a part of this process and helped him in producing more and more and more wealth, at the same time taking away and protecting. And I think not physical type of protection, but I believe it was a financial type, to where he wasn't going to be harmed. And so he had a vision. And notice that he reminds him in verse 13, he says, I am the God of Bethel. You know, that's very significant, because he's not saying I'm the God of Abraham. I'm not the God, he didn't say I'm the God of your father Isaac. That God of Bethel is a very personal moment that was between him and God. And so he's reminding him back to that relationship and that covenant promise that he had given to him that night, and also reminding him of his vow indirectly by saying that. So, and he also then reminds him, you are anointed pillar, and you made a vow to me. So now it's time, get up and go. So the response that Rachel and Leah have, I think, are united in the way that they say this is so fitting. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and it has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. First, that sounds pretty negative. You look at that and think that, what have you done? Have you robbed my father? It sounds like, but then you see what they're really expressing, this idea is, it's not in the house of their father that where their inheritance is. And it would be coming through Jacob anyway. And the fact that now all that wealth is theirs. It is now Jacob's, so it is a part of their inheritance as well. And so it does belong. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. So they both agree. You need to follow what God has said. So Jacob arose, and he set his sons and his wives on camels, and he drove all the way his livestock and all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired at Paddan Aram, and to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to the sheep to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had, and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. So he just gets up, kind of as we would say, in the middle of the night, and he just takes off. And he uses the opportune time to when Laban is going to be occupied in somewhere to where he's not going to be able to respond rapidly. But look at what we see at 19 there, where Rachel stole her father's household gods. You know, we just keep seeing these little things about Rachel's personality, her character itself. Again, like I said from the beginning, Jacob fell in love with her, I believe, out of more of a desire of her physical attributes. Leah, he was forced upon her, but yet, really, I believe she was the better woman. She was the better wife. We see that in the reflection of the names of the children and how she was trying to be loved by him. And then we see here another little bit of a snapshot of her personality where she's talking about where she goes and steals her father's household gods. It also makes me wonder how much priority had God been in Jacob's household. If it had been such a focus and been spiritually strong in their service, the love, and dedication to God, then Rachel wouldn't care about the father's household gods. Now, these household gods are not just Molech and things like that, these pagan gods in that sense. These are the ancestral gods. These are the ones that they would have set up that were to their family. It would be kind of like going in and stealing the best photos on the wall of your grandparents and your great-grandparents and the family that you would see when you walk in. You know, so a lot of times everybody has a little place in your house where you have a grouping of the photos and stuff of the families. Well, they didn't have cameras, so they had these little household idols. And they did, though, really worship them. But it would be something like that precious of somebody that was a family member walk into your house, take the most precious things associated with your family and take them away. But these were a little more. These were at the level of false gods in a sense. But Rachel steals them. So tricks him, disappears, heads towards the hill country of Gilead. When it was told, picking up in verse 22, when it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and he pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful, do not say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kindred pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me, and did not tell me so, that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs and tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly." So, God appears to him, gives him a warning, tells him, don't say anything good or bad, and tells him that, you need to be careful what you say to him. And but as they have that engagement, if you listen to the tone of Laban, it's like he's trying to displace all the fault over on Jacob. And he's trying to make Jacob the person that is bad, that you've taken him away, you've ripped them up out of here. I would have given you a great farewell. You didn't give me the decency to say goodbye, to throw you a party, but you did it like a thief. You did it like somebody who's come in and stole away my family, and you sent them all away. And so it's really trying to put the burden of guilt upon him. And so he tells him in verse 29 here, "It is in my power to do you harm. You've acted foolishly, but it's in my power. I could hurt you." He's walking a fine line because God told him, be careful what you say to him. But I think Laban is showing the failure of his own manipulative personality to control Jacob and trying to, I guess, verbally abuse him without walking that line where God would then come after him. because then he says, I could do you harm, but your God of your father, you know, he didn't say God, like as if it's my God too, spoke to me last night saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And then Laban continues to discuss. He said, now you've gone away because you've longed greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? And Jacob answered him and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stole them. So when I thought of this idea where Jacob in his ignorance of what's going on with the idols was Joseph. When Joseph sends the brothers back and he puts in their grain bags the cup, and then they pursue him, and Reuben says, or Judah says, look, if you find it, then whoever's got it on their mule, you can slay him, you can take him, that's it. And guess what? They find him. But here, he doesn't. So, you know, that is something. So he goes about. So, Jacob not only says that, but then he continues in his anger. He berates him. And Jacob then became angry and berated Laban. And Jacob said to Laban, what is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you threw all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it before my kinsmen and your kinsmen that you may decide between the two of us. These 20 years I've been with you. Because Laban went through, he searched. I'm kind of jumping because there's so much material we're going through here. But Laban went through, he tried to find, and then of course, Rachel was sitting on a horse or a camel, and she would not get up. She lied, said, oh, I can't because I'm having my season. And so she's able to keep the false gods and doesn't find them. And anger flows out from him and just strikes right back at him. And almost like you've come after me as if I'm some great thief. But every one of these animals that I have, I've acquired them according to the agreement. Okay, so it didn't turn out so good for you, but everything I have here. But those false gods are there, but he just could not find them. So he said, set them out before them. So he says, your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day of the heat consumed me, by the cold of the night my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house, and I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock. And you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of my Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and he rebuked you last night. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. And they took stones, and they made this heap, and they ate there by this heap. And Laban called it Jeher Sadatha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore he named it Gilead and Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between you and me. Then we are out of one another's sight. So they basically have to come to a conclusion and resolve this, that we're going to have to part our ways. But they never want to see each other's face again. And then Laban gets one more shot in. He's gonna say, he's gonna tell him, that if you oppress my daughters, if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is the witness between you and me. So we're going to go ahead and stop there. the whole kind of summarizing this is the idea again. We have Jacob departs and arrives broke. He continues this deceptive type of personality in his relationship, but he also then comes up against a relative who is just as deceptive as himself. And you see that conflict between the two. Doesn't justify either one of their deceptions. But God is still being faithful and fulfilling his promise. And so throughout all of that, he still prospers. And then he departs. He needs to return. And as he goes, we see that Laban's still coming after him. But it's kind of a reminder as well, I think, that hopefully, and we'll see this, that Jacob finally starts to see that there's a lot of his uncle in him. You know, they're not too far off from one another. But now the shift is going to be going from this conflict with Laban and extracting his family away to now he's got his brother. And next week we're going to look at the reunion of Esau and Jacob. So before we wrap up, let's have a prayer and then we'll call it an evening. Our most blessed and merciful Father, thank you ever so much for all that you do for us, what you continue to do for us. We hope, Father, that we could learn a lot about the way that you continue to be faithful and how that you're always with us, and that we need to be more focused on what is pure and what is right in our interactions with those around us, and not rely just that you're going to pull us through everything, that we also have a responsibility to remain spiritually focused and serving you and your moral values. We hope, Father, as we close this class, that we would all be able to take this wisdom and look around in our lives and be able to apply that wisdom. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Hope you'll join us at 9:45 for Bible study, 10:45 for worship, and come back next week for Jacob and Esau's reunion. God bless. We'll see you soon.